They did not send ships to conquer Earth. They sent ships to surround it, and then they left them there, engines idle, for 6 years. The Cordilev Hegemony did not want Earth cities. They wanted Earth's silence. A blockade is not a weapon. It is a punishment for a crime the punished were never told they committed. And the crime, as far as anyone could determine, was existing somewhere the hegemony had already decided to ignore. The insult made concrete. The first blockade communication arrived in the format the hegemony reserved for administrative notices, not declarations of war. It opened with a case number. It closed with a filing deadline. Between those two things sat 4 paragraphs of the driest prose humanity had ever been condemned by. Per Interstitial Commerce Directive 12C, all systems designated Sol cluster and dependent colonies are hereby placed under perimeter restriction status. This designation carries no punitive intent. It reflects the hegemony's administrative determination that Sol cluster development does not presently meet Tier 3 commerce thresholds required for open lane access. Restriction will be reviewed at the hegemony's convenience. At the hegemony's convenience. Not a deadline, not even the courtesy of contempt, just a shelf and humanity placed on it. The physical evidence of the restriction arrived before the diplomats did 611 hegemony blockade cutters, arranged in a lattice around Sol cluster, with the mathematical evenness of a fence built by someone who had never once imagined the thing behind it might try to climb over. Each cutter broadcast an identical navigational marker. A soft blue ping, repeating every 4 seconds, meaning closed not because you are dangerous, but because you are not yet worth opening for. The hegemony's regional prefect, Administrator Thalves Korin, addressed the United Nations by hologram 9 days into the blockade. He spoke flawless English, unaccented, warm at the edges, the way a man speaks when he has rehearsed kindness so many times it has become sincere. He smiled through the entire broadcast. "We understand this is disappointing," he said. "In another few centuries, once your infrastructure classification improves, this restriction will lift on its own, and you will find the wait was not so long as it seemed." He paused, the way people pause when they expect to be thanked. "We have taken the liberty of marking safe internal transit corridors within your own cluster so that daily life may continue largely undisturbed. We are not unkind. We are simply administrative." The room did not answer him for 11 full seconds. Then someone in the back, nobody important, nobody who would be remembered by name in the official transcript, said, quietly enough that the microphones almost missed it. He said, "Within your own cluster, like we're a filing cabinet." The protagonists reframe. Dr. Amara Osei was not in that room. She was 2 floors down, in a basement office at the Kwame Nkrumah Institute of Orbital Studies, staring at the same blockade formation everyone else in the world was staring at in horror. Except she was not looking at the 611 ships. She was looking at the gaps between them. Amara had spent 19 years building trajectory models for a category of space nobody paid her to study. The low-density interstitial regions between star systems, the places starship insurers called unproductive volume because nothing valuable had ever been found there, and nobody had ever looked hard enough to know if that was true. She had been laughed out of 2 funding panels for proposing that the gravitational shear zones between systems could, under the right conditions, be stabilized into navigable lattice corridors. The reviewers called the math elegant and the application non-existent. She kept the rejection letters. She read them again the night the blockade closed. She looked at Korin's own words on the transcript, safe internal transit corridors within your own cluster, and understood, with the specific quiet of a person watching an opponent misplay a hand, that the hegemony had drawn their blockade lattice using the same commercial shipping lane math every hegemony had used for 4,000 years. Straight lines, high-density approach vectors, the kind of space a starship insurer would call productive. They had not drawn a single cutter into the shear zones, because nobody built anything in the shear zones. Because as far as the hegemony's own charts were concerned, the space between systems was not space at all, it was distance. "I want the blockade telemetry," she told her department head that night, "not the ships, the gaps. You want to study the empty parts of a siege. I want to build in them," she said, and did not raise her voice at all, because she had learned a long time ago that the truest things did not need volume. They didn't blockade us. They blockaded the roads. They never once considered we might build somewhere that isn't on a road. The Discovery Loop. Interstitial Survey Vessel Adiz, Shear Zone 12 Delta 4 months into the blockade. The Adiz was not a warship. It was a converted ice-mapping tug with a cartography suite bolted to the hull in a shape that made structural engineers wince. And it carried 4 people into the dead space between the Sol cluster's outer marker buoys and the nearest hegemony patrol lane. A region so gravitationally chaotic that hegemony charts marked it, without irony, unnavigable disregard. Amara sat at the helm with her hands loose on the controls, watching a shear zone model resolve on the main display, thread after thread of gravitational tension pulling taut between three dim stars, forming, when the resolution finished, something that looked less like chaos and more like a woven net. She stopped breathing for a moment because her legs had been half-braced for the model to collapse into noise, the way it always had in simulation, and instead it held. "It's not empty," she said. "It's structured. It's just structured on a scale nobody builds ships to survive." Kaido Ren, propulsion, floated up beside her and looked at the same threads for a long time before he spoke, because he had spent 6 years designing drive systems for ships that were never meant to enter shear zones at all. And every instinct in him said this was where ships went to be torn apart. "The shear gradient here is 11 times what our hulls are rated for," he said. Then quieter, "Also it's stable, it's not chaotic, it's a pattern. Somebody could ride this instead of fighting it if the drive pulsed on the gradient's own rhythm instead of against it." He sat down on the deck, not because the ship had moved, but because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him up while his mind did that particular kind of math for the first time. Fabrication Bay, Shear Zone 12 Delta. 1 week later, Marcus Voss, structural engineer, had been assigned to catalog debris. What he found instead, drifting 100 kilometers off the D's position, was a hegemony relay buoy decommissioned 2 centuries ago, according to its corroded designation plate, abandoned in the shear zone because the hegemony had judged it not worth the fuel to retrieve. Marcus ran a structural scan out of habit more than hope, and then ran it twice more because he did not believe the first result. The buoy's hull alloy was rated for shear tolerances 4 times higher than anything humanity currently manufactured. It had been sitting there, forgotten, doing nothing, for 200 years, because the hegemony discarded material the way other civilizations discarded packaging. "There are 41 more of these on the long-range scan," Marcus said, and his voice did the thing voices do when a person is trying very hard to sound calm about something enormous. 41 abandoned relay hulls, rated for shear tolerances we can't yet manufacture, sitting in a region the hegemony has already told us in writing is unnavigable." He did not sit down. He put both hands flat on the console instead, the way a person braces before a wave they can already see coming. "They didn't leave us weapons, they left us a shipyard. They just didn't notice because to them, throwing something away and leaving it somewhere are the same act." Life Support Bay. 3 weeks after that, Dr. Priya Nair had the smallest discovery, and by the end, the one that mattered most, because a colony built in a gravitational shear zone is a colony with nothing to eat unless somebody solves that first. She had been trying, without much success, to grow algae cultures under the specific radiation profile the shear zones produced, a profile the hegemony's own abandoned buoy logs described, in a maintenance footnote nobody had bothered to translate for 2 centuries, as elevated but within Tier 1 biological tolerance, no remediation required. Tier 1, the lowest classification the hegemony bothered to define, below the threshold where they thought anything worth protecting could live. Priya read the footnote 4 times before she believed it, then went quiet for long enough that Amara came looking for her. "They rated this radiation as harmless to Tier 1 life," Priya said, holding up a cultivation tray where 3 strains of modified algae sat thriving in conditions that should have sterilized them. "Tier 1 is their word for barely worth cataloging. They wrote off an entire region of livable space because nothing important enough to them could survive there. Something not important enough to them can." She looked at the tray for a moment longer. "I think that's the whole blockade, actually, not just the ships, everything. They keep telling us what doesn't matter to them, and it keeps turning out to be exactly what we need." Each discovery closed the same way the last one had opened, with the quiet certainty that the next one would be larger, and each time it was. The ticking clock. It took the hegemony 4 months to notice the shipping manifests did not add up. Sol Cluster's internal fuel consumption had crept upward by 6%, and its industrial output had crept upward with it, in numbers too small to trigger an automatic flag, but large enough eventually for a junior logistics auditor named Ailsir Ban to file a discrepancy report nobody above him wanted to read. Administrator Corin read it anyway, because Corin, unlike most of his colleagues, had learned over 4 centuries of blockade administration that quiet numbers were more dangerous than loud ones. He ordered a long-range sweep of the shear zones, not because he expected to find anything, but because the discrepancy offended his sense of order, and Corin, more than anything, valued order. The sweep found 41 salvaged relay hulls arranged into the skeleton of something that was no longer debris. It found agricultural domes lit by shear zone radiation the hegemony's own charts had rated too worthless to monitor. It found, at the center of it all, a station with a population approaching 11,000, breathing air that had never once crossed a hegemony checkpoint. The formal ultimatum arrived 40 hours later, and it did not open with a case number this time. Interstitial development within restricted perimeter airspace constitutes an unauthorized settlement in violation of Directive 12C and represents, whatever its intent, a direct challenge to hegemony administrative authority. You have constructed a colony in space the hegemony classified as valueless specifically so that its absence would cause you no hardship. That you have populated it regardless does not alter its classification. It alters only the consequence. You are given one hegemony standard rotation, 19 hours, to evacuate the interstitial settlement and submit to inspection. Non-compliance will be treated as an act of open defiance, and the response will not be administrative. Amara read it twice, standing in the station's half-finished command deck with the shear zone lattice glowing gently on the main display behind her, and felt something in her chest that was not fear so much as a kind of settling, the way a held breath settles once a decision has finally been made for you. They gave us 19 hours, she said, not because it's generous, because they still think this is a filing violation. She turned to the room and her voice did not rise even now. We don't evacuate, we finish. The asymmetric battle. The deadline expired at 3:47 station time. 9 hegemony cutters entered the shear zone 11 minutes later, in the same rigid formation the blockade had always used, engines burning against the gravitational shear instead of with it, because 900 years of hegemony doctrine had never once needed to move any other way. They lost 11% of their approach velocity to shear drag in the first 90 seconds. Nobody on the Mediz bridge said anything. Kaito had told them that number 6 weeks ago. The station's 4 converted survey tugs moved on the shear gradient's own rhythm. The pulse Kaito had mapped from a stable current the hegemony had marked disregard. They closed distance in 14 seconds where the cutters needed 40. The lead cutter fired first. 2 rail slug volleys, standard hegemony spread, aimed at the station's central mass. The station's salvaged buoy hull plating held. Marcus had rated it for 4 times human tolerance. The hegemony had built it to survive worse than this and then thrown it away. The cutters adjusted. Good instincts for men who had never fought inside a shear zone. They fell into a pincer, the correct formation against a stationary target. It would have worked against a stationary target. The station was not stationary. It had never been stationary. It moved with the shear current, slow and constant, exactly the way Amara had modeled it 19 years ago in a paper 2 review panels had called elegant and useless. The pincer closed on empty space. 4 cutters overcorrected into the shear's steepest gradient, the one Kaito had marked in red on every simulation, the one no hegemony drive had ever been tuned to survive. Their hulls held for 6 seconds. Then they did not. 5 cutters remained. 1 broke formation, engines flaring hard away from the shear zone's core, and Amara watched it go without ordering pursuit. Let it go, she said. It's not fear. Their sensors just told them something true for the first time today, that this space isn't empty and they don't understand it yet. Chasing them teaches them nothing. Leaving them alone to think about it teaches them everything. The engagement lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Double resolution, tactical then strategic. The battle ended before the sun rose over the station's agricultural dome, which did not matter, because the station had no sun of its own and Priya's algae grew under artificial light regardless. By the time the last cutter's engine flare faded from the long-range sensors, Amara was already back at the cartography console, pulling up shear zone data from 3 adjacent systems the survey drones had not yet mapped. Marcus found her there an hour later. You're doing it again, he said. The war just ended and you're already looking at the next shear zone. It didn't end, Amara said. It just stopped being urgent. She did not look up from the display. There are 11 more clusters like this one within range. If the pattern holds, there are shipyards in all of them. I've been thinking about the next system since before this one finished. The personal transmission arrived 9 hours later, on a private channel, not the official hegemony diplomatic band. There was silence on the line for 4 full seconds before anyone spoke, the particular silence of someone deciding, for what might have been the first time in centuries, to say something unrehearsed. Dr. Osei, Corin's voice without the practiced warmth this time. I have reviewed the engagement telemetry personally. I want to be precise about what I am saying because I do not say it easily. We classified that region as without value. We were wrong about the region. And I find, reviewing this, that we were wrong in a way I did not expect to be wrong, not about your capability, which we underestimated in the ordinary way, but about your patience. It did not occur to us that a species denied every road would simply decline to need one. Another pause, shorter this time. It was audacious. I do not use that word carelessly. Amara let the silence sit for a moment before she answered. because she had learned, across 4 months of watching her own people build a home out of everything the hegemony had thrown away, that the quietest response was usually the truest one. "You didn't blockade us," she said. "You blockaded the parts of the map you'd already finished thinking about. We just happened to be standing somewhere you'd stopped looking." She ended the transmission there because there was nothing else the moment needed, and turned back to the cartography display, where the next shear zone was already resolving out of the noise. A wider one this time, threading between 4 systems instead of 3, unmapped, unclaimed, and marked, on every chart the hegemony had ever filed as nothing at all. "Marcus," she said without turning around, "pull the salvage manifest. I want to know what else they've thrown away. I want to know what else they've thrown away."